The Okoro family had everything: money, comfort, and the kind of life many only dreamed about. When they decided to spend a week in Zamura, the famous coastal city filled with white beaches and shining hotels, it was supposed to be a holiday full of joy. They arrived in expensive cars, their suitcases stacked high with designer clothes and perfumes that left trails in the air. Laughter surrounded them as they walked through the hotel lobby, their jewelry sparkling under the lights. Everyone looked like they were living a dream. But for Imani, the young wife of their son, it didn't feel like a holiday at all. She carried bags when no one else would. She walked behind them instead of beside them, and though she smiled politely, her heart was heavy. While her in-laws admired the ocean view and planned dinners, she felt like an outsider in her own family. She wished someone would notice her, talk to her, treat her like she mattered. But instead, she was treated like an invisible shadow. Behind her quiet face, pain slowly grew, and though the sound of the waves was peaceful, inside Imani's heart there was only loneliness. The holiday in Zamura was meant to be relaxing for everyone, but for Imani it became nothing less than hard labor. While the Okoro family stretched out on the beach, sipping cold drinks and laughing under umbrellas, Imani's hands were full of bags, towels, and children's toys. When they returned to the hotel, she was the one unpacking, folding clothes, arranging shoes, and making sure the rooms were tidy. If someone spilled juice, it was Imani who wiped it up. If someone wanted food, it was Imani who rushed to bring it. No one ever said thank you. They didn't see her as family. They saw her as a helper. Her sisters-in-law whispered loudly enough for her to hear, shaking their heads. She is only here because of our brother. Without him, who is she? Nothing. Their mother looked at Imani with eyes full of judgment, never warmth. Even when Imani tried to join their conversations, they changed the topic or pretended not to hear. She felt her place in the family was not at the table beside them, but somewhere behind, holding plates and clearing dishes. Each time she passed by carrying something heavy, they looked at her with the kind of pity and scorn usually reserved for servants. And the worst part was her husband sat silently, never defending her. He laughed with his sisters, sipped wine with his cousins, and let Imani carry the weight of humiliation alone. At night, when everyone was asleep, she sat quietly on the hotel balcony, staring at the city lights reflecting on the water. She asked herself why they couldn't see her heart, her worth, the love she had for their son. Tears filled her eyes, but she swallowed them down. She didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. They treated her like a servant, but deep inside, Imani held on to the quiet belief that one day her truth, her value, would shine too brightly for anyone to ignore. The hotel's restaurant was glowing that night. Golden lights hung from the ceiling, soft music floated in the air, and the tables were covered with fine linen and shining glasses. The Okoro family arrived dressed like royalty, silks, lace, and fabrics that shimmered under the lights. Imani too had worn her best dress, a deep blue outfit her late mother had once given her. For a moment she thought maybe tonight would be different, maybe she would finally feel like part of the family. But as everyone settled down, something happened that cut deep into her heart. The waiter pulled out a chair for Imani, but her mother-in-law gently pushed it back and said with a cold smile, "Let her stand. She can help us serve." The words hung in the air, heavy and cruel. Some of the family chuckled quietly, others avoided her eyes. Imani's hands trembled, but she nodded, forcing a weak smile as she picked up the serving spoon. All around her, laughter filled the table as plates were passed, glasses clinked, and stories were shared. Imani stood there, moving silently, pouring soup, carrying dishes, refilling drinks. Not one person asked her to sit down and eat. Each time she leaned forward to serve, her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. She kept telling herself to be strong, to hold her head high even if it hurt. Her husband sat across the table, laughing with his sisters, never once calling her to his side. That silence stung more than his family's insults. She was right there, dressed beautifully, yet treated as if she were invisible. When the meal ended, Imani stood at the edge of the room, her smile frozen, her dignity hanging by a thread. She wanted to scream, to cry, to ask why they hated her so much. But instead she kept quiet. Only her heart knew the weight of the insult, and only she felt the ache of standing in a room full of people who saw her not as family, but as someone meant to serve. That night, the whole city of Zamura seemed alive. From the hotel window, Imani could see fireworks bursting across the sky, painting it with colors of red, gold and green. Down by the beach, families were laughing, couples walked hand in hand, children chased the waves. The world outside looked so full of joy, but inside her chest there was only a heavy ache. She sat on the edge of the wide window, her dress pooling around her, her hands resting quietly in her lap. Everyone else in the family had gone to their rooms, satisfied after a grand dinner, but she was left alone with her thoughts. Her eyes followed each firework as it rose, exploded, and then disappeared into the darkness. She thought about how quickly happiness seemed to fade in her own life, just like those sparks. She had come into this family with love and hope, ready to give her heart. Instead, she was treated like an outsider, like someone who didn't belong. Her chest tightened and tears threatened to fall, but she closed her eyes and whispered softly to herself, "They may see me as nothing, but I know who I am." Her words were quiet, yet they carried strength. She remembered her father's teachings, how he always told her, "Your worth is not in their eyes, it is in yours." Those words now became her anchor. She straightened her back, wiped her tears, and let the glow of the fireworks reflect in her eyes. She decided she would not let their cruelty define her. In that moment of silence, she promised herself that no matter how they treated her, she would not break. Her pain was real, but her spirit was stronger. Alone by the window, wrapped in loneliness, Imani found something far more powerful than pity. She found her silent strength, the kind of strength that waits quietly until the world is forced to see it. The next morning, the Okoro family gathered in the hotel dining hall for breakfast. The table was filled with fruits, fresh bread, steaming teas, and shining silver trays of food. Laughter echoed as they enjoyed the morning together. But once again, Imani was not part of it. While they chatted and reached for plates, she quietly moved around the table, collecting the used cups and clearing away crumbs as though she were a waitress. Her back ached, her heart heavy, yet she forced herself to smile faintly. She didn't want them to see how deeply it hurt. Just as she reached for another plate, her phone buzzed inside her pocket. She froze for a moment. Who could be calling her so early? Wiping her hands quickly on a napkin, she pulled it out. On the screen the name glowed, Mr. Adeyemi. Her chest tightened. He had been her late father's trusted lawyer, the man handling all his affairs since his passing. Imani's breath caught in her throat, and her fingers trembled as she slid her thumb across the screen. She pressed the phone to her ear. "Hello." Her voice was soft, shaky, as though she already knew this call carried something important. On the other end, Mr. Adeyemi's calm but serious voice answered. "Imani, I hope I am not disturbing you. I called to inform you about your father's estate. The case we have been working on has finally reached its conclusion." Imani's knees felt weak. She glanced at the family still laughing at the table, unaware of her world about to change. Her hand tightened around the phone, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear the clinking of cutlery anymore. "Please go on," she whispered, her voice breaking. She could feel something shifting in the air, as though destiny had chosen this exact moment to reveal itself. With every word Mr. Adeyemi spoke, the life she thought she knew was about to transform forever. Imani held the phone tightly to her ear, her breath caught in her throat. The clatter of spoons and the laughter of the Okoro family faded into the background, replaced by the steady, calm voice of Mr. Adeyemi. "Imani," he said gently, "your father's estate case is finalized. The court has approved all documents. From this day forward, you are the sole heir to his businesses, his lands, and every account under his name." For a moment she couldn't move. The words struck her like thunder in the quiet of her soul. Her hands began to tremble, and her chest rose and fell with sharp breaths she couldn't control. The lawyer's voice continued, but his words blurred as her eyes filled with hot tears. She turned slightly toward the window, not wanting anyone at the table to see her face. Her mind raced. All those years of being treated as nothing, of being spoken down to, of being made to feel small. And here in this single moment everything shifted. The girl they mocked as a burden, the woman they treated like a maid, had just been handed a destiny bigger than their wildest imagination. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She could only whisper a shaky, thank you, sir." Memories of her late father washed over her, his voice telling her never to doubt herself, his hands holding hers as a child, his quiet strength. She felt as though he had reached across time and given her this moment, reminding her that she was never forgotten. As the call ended, Imani lowered the phone slowly, her heart pounding. She sat in silence, staring at the table where her in-laws still laughed, unaware that the woman they looked down on had just become the owner of empires. Tears slid down her cheeks. Not tears of weakness but tears of release, of power, of knowing her story had just been rewritten. Imani sat frozen in her chair, the weight of Mr. Adeyemi's words still echoing in her mind. Just moments ago, she had been carrying plates like a servant, her dignity bruised with every insult. Now with one phone call everything had changed. Her father's wealth, his businesses, his lands, his accounts, all of it now belonged to her. She was no longer the overlooked daughter-in-law who had been treated like nothing. She was an heiress, richer and more powerful than the very people who laughed at her. Her heart pounded so hard she thought the whole room could hear it. She placed her phone on the table, her fingers still trembling, and looked at the family from across the room. They had no idea what had just happened. No idea that the woman they mocked behind closed doors had just risen above them all. Her chest swelled not with pride but with something stronger, justice. Life had turned in her favor, and it had done so at the perfect time. She thought of the countless moments she swallowed her pain, the insults she endured in silence, the times she stood at the edge of their gatherings like an outsider. Every single tear she had hidden now seemed to have a purpose. Destiny had been quietly preparing this moment for her. And now it had arrived. Imani wiped her cheek with the back of her hand and smiled faintly, a smile only she understood. They had called her just a maid. But she was now a woman with wealth and power beyond their reach. The shift was not just about money, it was about worth. She finally saw herself clearly, not as they defined her, but as who she truly was. In that instant Imani's story turned. The one who was made to serve would no longer bow her head. She had stepped into her true inheritance, into her true identity. From maid to heiress, her life would never be the same again. The next morning, the Okoro family gathered again for breakfast. The long table was filled with fresh fruits, hot pastries, and steaming pots of tea. Laughter floated in the air as they spoke about the day's plans, shopping, boat rides, and another evening party. Imani moved quietly around the table, pouring juice and passing plates, her phone resting by her side. She looked calm, but inside her chest was a storm of emotions after the call she had received the day before. Just as she reached for a tray of bread, her phone buzzed again. Without thinking, she picked it up. This time the call connected to loudspeaker, the lawyer's voice ringing clear across the room. "Good morning, Madam Imani," Mr. Adeyemi's voice said warmly. "I just wanted to confirm the details once again. As the sole heir, all documents of your father's estate are now officially signed under your name. His companies, his farmlands, the Zamira villas, and the full accounts. Congratulations once more." The sound of forks and knives scraping against plates stopped immediately. Every eye at the table turned to her. For a moment the room was completely still, as though time itself had paused. The same woman they had treated as invisible was being addressed with respect and honor, her inheritance laid out for all to hear. One of her sisters-in-law let a spoon slip from her hand, and it clattered loudly against the plate. Her mother-in-law's smile froze on her face. Even her husband's laughter died in his throat. The air was thick with shock, disbelief, and a quiet fear none of them could hide. Imani's hand stayed steady as she placed the phone back on the table. She did not explain. She did not boast. She simply looked around the room, her silence louder than any words. For the first time it was not she who was small, it was them. In that moment the roles had changed forever, and the Okoro family knew it. The silence at the breakfast table was heavy, almost painful. A moment ago the Okoro family had been laughing and talking over fresh bread and fruit, but now every sound had disappeared. All eyes were locked on Imani, and the air felt thick enough to cut. Her phone still lay on the table, the lawyer's voice still echoing faintly in their minds. Sole heir businesses, lands, accounts. Her sisters-in-law, who had spent the entire trip whispering about how she was lucky to marry into their family, now sat frozen, their mouths slightly open. One of them tried to smile, but the smile came out stiff and forced, her eyes betraying the panic she felt inside. Her mother-in-law's face, usually full of confidence and judgment, was suddenly pale, her lips trembling as though she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Even the cousins who always laughed at Imani's silence had their spoons hanging midair, staring at her as though she had transformed into someone unrecognizable. And then there was her husband. He looked at her with wide, confused eyes, his fork still in his hand but forgotten. "Imani," he whispered, but nothing else followed. The man who once joined in mocking her couldn't even form a full sentence now. His voice was shaky, his pride melting in front of everyone. Imani sat still, her posture calm, her face composed. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't explain. She didn't remind them of how they had treated her. She simply let the weight of the truth hang in the air. The woman they had called a burden, a maid, someone unworthy of respect, had just been revealed as wealthier than the entire family put together. Their shock was almost visible, like cracks spreading across a glass window. No one reached for food again. No one dared to laugh. Every single person at that table now realized they had misjudged her. The power had shifted, and for the first time it was Imani who held it. Her husband stared at her as though he was seeing her for the first time. His fork clattered against the plate, forgotten, as his lips parted in confusion. The man who had laughed with his sisters when they mocked her, the man who let his family treat her like a maid, now looked small and uncertain. His voice cracked as he finally spoke. "Imani, why didn't you tell us?" The words sounded weak, almost childish, like someone begging for an excuse. He wanted her to explain, to soften the blow, to make sense of the shift that had just shattered their family's pride. But Imani did not answer. She turned her head slowly and met his eyes. Her face was calm, but her silence carried a weight heavier than any storm. It was the kind of silence that reminded him of every moment he had failed to defend her, every time he had chosen laughter over love, every time he had been a partner in her humiliation. The others at the table watched nervously, waiting for her to respond, but she didn't. Her eyes spoke louder than her mouth ever could. They said, "You knew my pain. You watched my tears. You chose to ignore them. And now you ask me why I stayed silent?" Her husband shifted uncomfortably, his hand gripping his cup as though it might steady him. But nothing could steady the shame that had begun to creep into his chest. For the first time he felt what she had felt for years, powerless and unseen. Imani lowered her gaze back to her plate, her lips pressed in a firm line. She didn't need to argue. She didn't need to justify herself. Her silence was the answer. And in that silence, her husband finally realized the truth. The woman he had dismissed, the woman he had allowed to be mocked, had risen far above him, and she no longer owed him words. The air at the table shifted quickly. Moments ago, they were mocking her in silence with their stares, but now the Okoro family began to scramble. One of her sisters-in-law forced a shaky laugh and pulled out a chair. "Imani, please sit. You must be tired. Come join us properly." Her mother-in-law, who had never once called her anything kind, leaned forward with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Our precious daughter, you should not be serving us. You are part of this family." Their voices were suddenly soft, their tones dripping with false sweetness. Even the cousins who once looked at her with disdain now said, "Sister, have some fruit, you need to eat." They passed plates toward her as though kindness could erase years of cruelty. The same people who once pushed her aside now wanted to draw her close. But Imani sat still, her face unreadable. She watched them, and though she remained polite, her heart did not move. Their words felt hollow, like paper masks hiding the truth. She remembered the whispers, the insults, the laughter at her expense. She remembered being told to serve instead of sit, to stay quiet instead of belong. Now, with her father's inheritance in her name, they were eager to wrap her in false affection. But it was too late. Respect given out of fear is not respect. It is desperation. And Imani could see it clearly in their eyes. She smiled faintly, a small, graceful curve of her lips, but it wasn't warmth, it was power. They had shown her who they truly were, and she would not forget. Their late kindness was not a gift to her. It was a shame to them. They had lost their chance to love her sincerely, and no amount of sweet words could wash away the scars of how they once treated her. Imani rose slowly from her seat, the soft fabric of her attire catching the sunlight streaming through the wide hotel windows. The deep blue cloth shimmered, almost as though it was alive, wrapping her in quiet elegance. She didn't need to say a word. The simple act of standing was enough to command the room. Every eye followed her, but no one dared to stop her. She pushed the chair back gently, her movements calm, almost regal. The same woman they had once ordered to serve food now carried herself like a queen. There was no anger in her steps, no shouting, no rush to prove anything. Instead, dignity wrapped around her like a crown, shining brighter than any jewel the family had ever worn. Her husband opened his mouth as if to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. Her mother-in-law reached a hand forward, whispering, "Imani, sit please." But Imani only gave her a soft glance, one that held 1,000 unsaid words. It was not hate, not bitterness, it was something far stronger. It was freedom. With measured steps, she walked away from the table, her heels clicking lightly against the polished floor. The chatter of cutlery and laughter that once filled that room had vanished, replaced by a heavy silence that followed her out. For the first time, she was not walking behind them or serving them. She was walking ahead, choosing her own path. When she reached the door, she paused for a brief moment. Without turning back, she took a slow breath, as though releasing every ounce of pain they had given her. Then she stepped forward, leaving the weight of their false kindness and their empty respect behind. The Okoro family sat frozen, watching her go, realizing they had just lost more than an heiress. They had lost a woman who carried herself with a strength none of them could match. And Imani, with her head held high, walked away into the light, free at last. Imani did not look back as she left the hotel. The same building where she had been treated like a servant no longer felt like a prison. It was simply a chapter she had closed. At the reception desk, she placed her card on the counter, her voice calm as she said, "I'll be checking out." The receptionist looked surprised, but quickly smiled and nodded, unaware that she wasn't leaving without a destination. She was walking into a life already waiting for her. A sleek car arrived to pick her up, its driver stepping out respectfully and opening the door for her. The ride was quiet, the city of Zamira passing by in flashes of sunlight, palm trees and ocean breeze. For the first time on this trip, Imani felt the air against her skin without heaviness in her heart. She wasn't following anyone's orders, she wasn't carrying anyone's bags. She was simply herself. When the car pulled into the gated entrance of a villa by the beach, her breath caught softly. The wide gates opened smoothly, revealing white walls, tall glass windows, and a stretch of private sand that kissed the ocean. This wasn't just a villa. It was a symbol of her father's love, a gift left for her to stand tall in. As she stepped out, the villa staff hurried forward. But unlike her in-laws, they didn't look at her with disdain or mockery. They bowed slightly, greeting her with warmth and respect. "Welcome home, Madam Imani," one of them said, his voice sincere. Her chest tightened, not with pain but with gratitude. Finally, she was in a place where she belonged, where her presence was honored, not belittled. She walked into the villa, sunlight pouring through the open doors, and felt a peace she hadn't felt in years. The sound of the waves echoed gently in the background, like a song written just for her. Imani smiled, realizing she was no longer living under anyone's shadow. She had stepped into her new horizon, a life shaped not by cruelty, but by freedom, respect, and destiny fulfilled. Back at the hotel, the Okoro family sat around the breakfast table, but the energy that had filled the room earlier was gone. The laughter had vanished, the clinking of forks and spoons had stopped, and even the soft hum of conversation was gone. Each person sat stiffly, staring at their plates or at nothing at all. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on them, heavy and impossible to ignore. They had spent days treating Imani like she was nothing, ordering her to carry bags, serve food, and remain in the background while they enjoyed themselves. They had whispered, laughed, and mocked her behind her back, certain that she would never rise above the role they had assigned her. And yet, in a matter of hours, everything had changed. The quiet, gentle woman they dismissed had become more powerful, wealthier, and more respected than any of them could imagine. Her husband kept shifting in his seat, his face pale, unable to look at anyone. His sisters whispered among themselves, their voices shaky, the forced politeness they had tried to show earlier crumbling into embarrassment. Their mother sat in silence, her pride bruised, her eyes darting toward the door through which Imani had left, as if half expecting her to come back and explain herself. But Imani wasn't coming back. Not to seek approval, not to prove herself, not to remind them of what they had lost. For the first time they realized the truth. Their cruelty, their judgment, and their arrogance had not broken her. It had only prepared her to rise higher. Every insult, every slight, every moment they had treated her as a servant had made her strength and patience all the more remarkable. In that silence, the Okoro family understood that they had underestimated her completely. The woman they thought was beneath them had become untouchable, and there was nothing they could do to change that. Their realization was bitter, sharp and unforgettable, a quiet punishment far harsher than any words could see. By the next week, the story of Imani had spread through Zamora like wildfire. In cafes, markets, and along the bustling streets, people whispered about the young woman who had been treated like a maid by her own family, only to inherit her father's entire estate. Everyone was talking about how quietly she had endured humiliation, how patiently she had waited, and how gracefully she had stepped into her new life. Social media lit up with her story. Pictures of her standing in her private villa by the beach, dressed in flowing African attire that shimmered in the sunlight, went viral. People admired not just her wealth, but the calm strength she carried, the way she never raised her voice, never retaliated, yet had claimed her rightful place in the world. Imani became more than a woman with money. She became a symbol of dignity, resilience, and destiny's perfect timing. Even those who had known her family or witnessed the trip firsthand shared the tale, shaking their heads at the irony and marveling at her patience. Young women across the city looked at her as an example of quiet strength, realizing that true power often comes from endurance, grace, and believing in oneself. Imani herself rarely spoke about the events, letting her life and choices tell the story. But everywhere she went, people remembered her, retelling the moment the maid had become an heiress. Her journey became a lesson whispered in awe. Sometimes those who are underestimated rise in ways that leave the world, and the very people who doubted them completely stunned.